While the partnership between hotels and restaurants is not new, the influence and impact that restaurants have on hotels is more important than ever. Restaurants have become the face of the hotel and the destination. In many cases, guests are choosing where to stay based on the food and beverage offerings over the hotel's loyalty program. And there are added benefits and complexities to running a restaurant in a hotel. There has to be a strong sense of brand alliance and mutual strategy, an immense amount of interdepartmental communication, and keep in mind that in some cases, the kitchen does not close. To discuss this in greater detail, we have a highly qualified panel of experts that I'm happy to introduce. We'll start over on the left with Peter Peterson, President and Managing Partner at Cultivate Hospitality Group, leading the strategy, origination, and execution of the firm's consulting engagements and food and beverage investments. Peter has a dynamic background in luxury hotels, food and beverage operations, and real estate development. Next, we have Chef Tyler Aiken. He's chef and owner of Stock Restaurants here in Philadelphia and chef partner at Le Cavalier, the signature and Best of Philly award-winning restaurant at the historic Hotel DuPont. Among many accolades, Tyler has been named 21 people key to continuing Philly's restaurant boom. Outside of the restaurant, he also serves as a board member on the Independent Restaurant Coalition. Next, we have Kevin Boehm. He's an influential and visionary CEO and co-founder of Boca Restaurant Group based in Chicago, but expanding across the country. Kevin has successfully opened 30 restaurants in the last 27 years and has received accolades such as the James Beard Award for Outstanding Restaurateur, and his restaurant, Boca Restaurant, has been awarded a Michelin star for 9 consecutive years. Lastly, we have Chef Alon Shaya, is the Philadelphia-raised, New Orleans-based chef and partner of Pomegranate Hospitality, includes Saba in New Orleans, Safta in Denver, and Miss River and Chandelier Bar at the Four Seasons Hotel in New Orleans. Chef Alon has received a James Beard Award for Best Chef in the South and will be opening up a restaurant this summer in the Bahamas. Moderating this incredibly talented panel is Tim Carman, who's been a food reporter at the Washington Post, my hometown, for the last 13 years. Tim Carman has built a robust journalism career starting as a bureau clerk at the Kansas City Star, moving into a role as food editor at the Washington City Paper, and writing for publications such as Imbibe Magazine, The American Scholar, and Men's Journal, to name a few. His work has appeared in 5 volumes of the best food writing and has garnered success focusing on complex partnership between hotel and restaurants, national food issues, and covering under-the-radar restaurants in Washington, D.C. and beyond. Tim, I'll let you take it from here.
Great. Thank you so much. So this is a really interesting subject, and we really do have a panel that can address it all. We've got people on the panel that operate restaurants within hotels, that they have licensed their name and concept at hotels. We have people here that are negotiating a deal on a new restaurant in a space. We have people here that have just scuttled a deal to put a restaurant in a hotel. We've got people who are very happy with their hotel deals. And we have people, or at least one, that is not so happy. And but if you think we're sling mud, you're in the wrong place, because a lot of these contracts, they have no non-disparagement deals. So just be forewarned.
We're just going to change the names when we say it.
That's something I hadn't thought of. Yeah, that's great. Okay. Peter, let's start with you. Peter is, I think, uniquely situated to really talk about this. Peter, you tell us a little bit about what you do, and then give us a just very brief outline of what a difference is between a management and a license deal when you're looking into putting a restaurant in a hotel.
Sure. So I've been in the hospitality industry for about 30 years, started out in operations, managing restaurants, then kind of switched over to the real estate side. of the business and kind of brought those two worlds together. So I've got the experience on the restaurant side and on the kind of the evil landlord side. I'll call it that in a lot of cases, or not so evil. Depends on who it is. I do a lot of deal making in hotels and outside of hotels for chefs, and also on the real estate side. In the hotel world, there's a specific nuance to a lot of the deals that we do because of the license versus management. And in a management deal, you've got a lot more control in terms of how you can influence what's happening in that hotel and how you are representing your brand, because you are self-operating within that hotel. They're your employees, they're your managers, and you pretty much can run it, not 100%, but as close to an independent restaurant as you possibly can. In a license deal, and you can end up doing a license deal for a number of different reasons. Sometimes it's because there's a union in the hotel, and some operators are not wanting to kind of be operating in that environment. Or it may be across the world, and you don't want to have to send your people to a foreign country to manage a restaurant. It's just not practical to do that. So in that case, it's a license agreement. You're basically taking your IP, your brand, your name, and you're giving it over to someone else to operate it on your behalf. And the subtle nuance to that is you've got to be very, very careful about how you negotiate those deals and the rights that you have within that deal to maintain the quality of your restaurant, that DNA, right? We all know the difference, right? If you go into a restaurant and it's operated by a chef, or if it's operated potentially by a third party, right? It doesn't have that sense of ownership, right? You can just sense it. So these deals are very nuanced and and we get into very specific terms about how we can make sure that a chef can really still maintain that control, even though someone else is managing it for them.
So, Peter, tell us, I know you just recently negotiated the deal for Jose Andres at the Old Post Office Hotel in Washington, D.C. I can't imagine a more powerful person in the world right now than Jose. Like, I don't know how much of the particulars you can share, but like, give us a broad sketch of like how that deal came down and what maybe Jose wanted in particular, or his team did.
Did you say he's feeding the world, for God's sakes? Give him another percentage point.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of how do I say this? The irony in that deal is quite interesting considering the history of the hotel. So, if you know the history of the hotel, Jose was
Donald Trump used to own it.
Yes, and Jose was meant to open a restaurant there in the Trump Hotel. When it opened, the famous escalator speech happened, and basically Jose said, "I'm not operating a restaurant in this hotel anymore," and kind of there was a lawsuit, and anyway, you can read all about it. So when the hotel changed hands, I guess a little over a year ago, Jose was right on that door, like, I need to get in here, I need to do a restaurant. So we actually ended up doing a lease in that deal. So it's a little bit different. So he has ultimate control over everything that he does. There was some money given by the hotel. He put up some money to kind of finish out the restaurant, and that's the structure.
Kevin, I wanted to talk to you. You mentioned, and this was sort of a little wrinkle you threw in right before we started talking today, that it's not just between hotels and restaurant operators and chefs. There's a third party that often gets involved, or maybe third and fourth. It's you're talking about developers and investors, and that can really complicate a deal. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your dealings with all parties involved.
Yeah, sure. I just want to start by saying, the restaurant industry is rarely in the catbird seat. Usually we're behind the eight ball, if I can mix my metaphors for a second. But so management deals within restaurants, I think because the slow dying of traditional retail, that the restaurant industry right now is in this great position where we help rationalize developments for a lot of developers. And the one key point that I think gets taken out of this conversation sometimes is you're not just doing a memorandum of understanding with a hotel or a hotel group. You're also dealing a lot of times with a developer, and that developer might not know the restaurant business very well. I was just in a deal that I walked from after 14 months. So 14 months, we never got the deal signed. We definitely had real money that we spent on it. We had been part of the design process. And I jumped on a Zoom one day, and a person appeared on that Zoom who was one of the developer's investors, and she wanted to talk to us about our dessert menu. And I said in the Zoom out loud, I said, is this really happening right now? And she just wanted to tell us that she didn't like our dessert concept and that we needed to have 8 to 10 desserts on the menu. And when I explained to her that we had a very unique dessert structure that we were doing, that we had not designed a pastry kitchen in there, she's like, well, whatever, you'll just buy the desserts from someone else. And I said, we need to break up. And so I've done a few hotel deals before, and when you're looking at those structures, yes, you are doing a deal with a hotel, but you're signing a contract with a developer, and that developer might not know the restaurant business at all. I did a deal years and years ago where we had been protected with room service, which I recommend to anybody. If you're doing a deal, figure out how to be protected, because you can lose copious amounts of money doing formal room service within a hotel. So we were protected within that deal, but the developer did not understand why it was losing money. So he called me one day and he's like, I just don't understand why you need 3 people at room service. And I go, meet me there at 7:30 tomorrow morning. He's like, okay. So we get there at 7:30 in the morning. Within 15 minutes, like I'd planned it, and trust me, I did not, 25 tickets came in. One of the tickets was just a bottle of water. One of the tickets was just toast. And so I had to basically give them an education on how it all worked, which is something you really don't want to do. You don't want to sit in a P&L meeting with them every single month and explain it to them. So I think doing, just like you would vet a spouse or a business partner, you need to do the same within developers and hotel groups. So everybody has a true understanding of what they're getting themselves into and you knowing what you're getting yourself into.
So what strikes me about that, Kevin, is there must be a lot of unknown unknowns. And this takes experience to figure it out. And this takes me to Tyler. Tyler, you're well known here in Philly, but you've also got a restaurant in a hotel in Wilmington. And I know you told me that you're starting a negotiation, or you're close to negotiating a deal for another hotel restaurant. And I wondered, what you've learned between the first one and the second deal.
That's a great question. A lot. I think that it's important, especially in like a licensing or what might be called a consulting framework. To remember throughout the process, from the beginning of the dance, which can sometimes take a frustratingly long time. I mean, Kevin mentions 14 months. That's not atypical at all. And sometimes during that dance where you're getting to know each other and understand people's goals and objectives and how folks work, it's important all along to remember that ultimately, like Peter said, you are kind of handing over your reputation and your name. And, I think that in this second go around, it's been important to me to, push a little further even. This sounds counterintuitive, but there are times when you're in this kind of protracted process of getting to know each other and agreeing on some broad strokes about how things will work. You can kind of get very close to that line where you feel like you're sort of handing over the goods before you have those assurances, before you have protections. And so, sometimes that's needed, to kind of seal the deal and have everybody on the same page. But, I think knowing ultimately where to draw the line and say, hey, this has gone too far. This is starting to feel like we're in that space where, there should be signatures on a page and like a true understanding on a more comprehensive level about where this is heading. That it's important to understand where that line is, and I think I'm learning more all the time about where that is. And in the meantime, you're incurring expenses. Like lawyers are a big part of all this, for better or worse, and that being able to make that judgment about how much am I going to incur before it feels like this has gone too far and I actually can't walk away, is an important thing to be able to recognize.
You can't walk away because you've invested too much money at this point?
I don't feel that way at the moment, but it can get to that point quickly, especially if you're not an established kind of operator in the space with a full organization and revenue streams from maybe having done like 20 or 30 of these. Yeah,
if I could just jump on
Yeah,
that.
of course.
Unfortunately, chefs and restaurant operators are not treated the same way as a lawyer or an architect or a designer. And developers are notorious for, just like you're saying, getting as much information as they can out of it and just dragging the process on and on and on without actually getting to signatures and actually starting to write checks. And so if you really have to try and flip that script a little bit and get to an MOU that's signed as quickly as possible, not rush it, right? Thoughtfully, but get that signed. And in that MOU, you've got to have some provisions where they're starting to write checks, because then it's real. Until they start writing checks in their mind, it's not a real thing. It's like an option. Like, okay, this is an optional thing. So you got to try and get there as quickly as possible.
So, Alon, I know you have both kind of restaurants in hotels, ones where you manage and ones where you've licensed. And one thing that you had mentioned that I think is very interesting, like if you're doing a licensing deal, you've really got to be careful about the way it's structured so that you have some control over hiring, like, because you talked about like, this is a reputational thing for you. And if the hotel is running the restaurant for you, how do you make sure that they are training the staff so that they represent your values? And I wondered like what you've come to and how you deal with that. Like when the restaurant under your name, with your name and your reputation on the line, is being run by a hotel, how do you get them to kind of absorb your values?
Yeah, well, our values, our core values as a company are really the backbone of everything that we do. My wife, Emily, and I started Pomegranate Hospitality in 2017 based on a set of core values that we committed that we promised our team and our partners, our stakeholders, that we would uphold. And we talk about those core values every single day. They're built into how we recruit, how we evaluate, how we do our exit interviews. Though I like the idea of an exit tasting. Thank you, Eric. And without, aside from profit, aside from food quality, aside from aesthetics, we cherish those values as the most important thing that we do every single day. So when you're partnering with someone that will be representing your name, your brand, they also have to align with those values. And that is, there's no science to that. There's no formula to that. It is really based on relationship, and it's based on constant communication, and also based on, as Kevin was saying, there may be a time where you realize it's not working, and it's time to break up, and that is not because you're not making enough money. It could be potentially because you don't have the same value system. So when we partnered with the Four Seasons in particular, we set up in the contract in the very beginning that we would be responsible for hiring the executive chef and the general manager. And by doing that, we were able to assure that we would have the leadership in place that would really be there to represent who we are to not really to the customers, but to the other team members there. Even though the team members there aren't employees of Pomegranate Hospitality, we feel that they are, right? We cherish those relationships in a way that they are. That's the way that we communicate with them, and so there's this kind of constant dance that happens, and regular meetings and regular structure of communication to ensure that those values are being upheld. And if they're not, we have to speak up. We empower our team members in our company to speak up when something doesn't feel right or doesn't seem right. That's one of empowerment is a core value of our company. And we also believe that for ourselves too, that we should be empowered to speak up if we feel something isn't right. And so we do, and we talk about those things. And there's never a moment that's going to come where you're going to say, oh, we got it all figured out. We're good. Culture. Awesome. Yay. We did that. Let's move on to something else. It is every single day part of the puzzle. And then you have to build your team around that, and you have to surround yourself with people that will align with that. Because if one person in an organization believes something and other people don't, then it's not going to happen. It's going to crumble. It's going to be a house of cards. It really has to be every single person aligned within these set of values that will stand behind them and live them out. And if it's not, and if one weak part of that chain exists, you have to figure out how to get that replaced.
So let's open this up. Let's not, anybody can jump in, but I wanted to talk about how you make money in these deals. Like, once you're in the restaurant, once you got in the hotel and you've got a restaurant, it's like, are you just getting a set amount every month from your deal, or are you getting a percentage of sales? And I think just as important, once it goes south, like when the pandemic hit, how do you start dealing with losses when you're a partnership with the hotel?
I can jump in. I mean, all of our deals are roughly the same. We have a development fee when we do it, so that's something that's paid immediately, because a lot of times when you're building something, especially when you're building something that's very big, there's a lot of work that has to go in beforehand. So we always put a development fee in when we're doing all that work with designers and architects ahead of time. But then it's a percentage of top line and percentage of bottom line. And that varies a bit depending on what deal you do. And I've done it in a million different ways. But I think what most of the deals that are getting thrown out there right now are somewhere around 5% of top line and 15% of bottom line, roughly. That goes to us. So they're great hedges. So if you've got a restaurant group and you have 4 deals that are lease deals where you put up all the money and you don't know whether you're going to be profitable or not, the hotel deals are great because honestly, to quote Goodfellas, I think it's "fuck you, pay me." I mean, you get paid in management deals no matter what. Now, you do have to put a budget forth every single year that your profitability and your sales have some sort of alignment with that budget, and those can be punitive if you're way off from your budget. But they're incredible because there's no investment and you get paid almost no matter what. But that's usually an earned thing. They're not giving away a lot of management deals to people that are first-time owners. So these are deals that, fortunately, if you've been in the business a long time and you've proved yourself to be a viable operator, you can get these great deals.
Yeah, I would also just throw in on the top line fee, always trying to shoot for a guaranteed minimum as well. So the 5% is probably about the average right now. It can go as high as 6 or 7, as low as 4 if it's a really large hotel. But always ask for that guaranteed minimum fee, and again, that can be anywhere from $250 upwards to $700,000. But that, again, there's a certain amount of opportunity cost involved in you taking on a hotel project, and you don't want it to be 100% just based on sales. You need that guaranteed fee for your time.
And it's all a negotiation. I think we're about to open up a restaurant in the Bahamas, and whether or not we would be involved or not, this restaurant would make a certain amount of money because there's a certain amount of people already built into the hotel rooms and to the resort, and so there could also be like a smaller percentage fee up to a certain number that they know they would do anyway, whether they were just serving chicken tenders or hummus. So then when you get up to a certain dollar amount, then that can potentially start to grow. So there's a lot of different ways, as Kevin was saying too, like he's done it a million different ways. I think that each property that you decide to go into could be unique in a certain way, and you have to be open to those negotiations. And you also have to walk into every deal thinking that what is it going to be worth for me to do this? Am I going to spend all of this time and resource and my team members' time and resource to do something that might not necessarily bring us the income that we need to hire a couple more people and to do and to run our business in a way that we believe we should run it. So we walk into each negotiation with an open mind, but also with a minimum number that would make it worth it for us to do.
It also doesn't need to be a hotel deal for you to do a management deal. We had a developer reach out to us in Nashville recently, and I was like, I don't think I'm signing another lease deal. I've signed 36 leases over the last 30 years. I was like, I think I'm only doing management deals from now on. He's like, I'll still do a management deal, and it's not in a hotel. So it's two freestanding restaurants next to each other, and we just negotiated a management deal on that.
Yeah, and just a subtle but important difference for you to understand when you're thinking about this is if you are signing a lease on a property, you're helping to improve the value of that property by sending in rent payments, right? So that's how you create that value for the landlord. Here's the rent, and the value is there. In a management agreement, you're creating a bottom line, hopefully, right? Hopefully the restaurant is profitable. You've got money coming through that the owner is benefiting from. But the intangible, which is always the hardest to measure, but super, super important, is the value of having that restaurant in, whether it's an office building or a residential building, or in this case, a hotel. There's a value there in terms of what the room rate may increase. Right, so having a great restaurant within the hotel can draw more traffic. It may boost room rate, and that's something that you have to really have in the back of your mind because you have to get away from just looking at the P&L of that restaurant. There's other value that's created for that property that you really have to understand and push for when you're asking for a higher management fee or incentive fees and things like that.
And I think on top of that, looking at how a lot of developers operate, really investing heavily in a certain neighborhood, or if it's a smaller market, an entire city, beyond the four walls of that building, that hotel, that mixed use building, the kind of runoff, intangible increase in value for that entire portfolio that developer may be holding in that market that I think should be considered as well.
And then one other really important part that I wanted to bring up was I think the need, especially today, knowing that a pandemic can happen or a huge hurricane can happen or a tornado can happen, that diversifying your portfolio is very, very important as an operator. That, you've signed a lot of leases, that's great. Let's do some licensing deals if you can, do some management deals if you can, maybe get into food service for retirement homes or for university dining or other areas that aren't just necessarily like putting another egg into the same basket of just only signing leases for the same kind of restaurant within one city. In New Orleans, we've had our share of ups and downs. And, if the power goes out for 2 weeks and all of your restaurants are there, then you're out of revenue for every single stream of revenue that you have for your company. But if we have a restaurant in New Orleans and a restaurant in Denver, if something happens in New Orleans, we at least know that Denver is still up and running.
Also, going back to the prior discussion before us, if you want to build a better company, you can use these guaranteed payments that are coming up something to actually build infrastructure for your company. I was talking to a restaurant in New York the other day. They have one restaurant, and he was saying he just got offered a management deal and he turned it down because he said he didn't have enough infrastructure. And I'm like, well, what are you doing? You could take the money that you're getting from this, you were getting a guaranteed minimum, and you can build that infrastructure. He was like, fuck, I hope they haven't chose somebody else yet. I'm going to call him back. But this is one of the ways that you can build the company that you want to be. If I could go back in time and look at it that way, I don't think there was as many management agreements available in the 90s or early 2000s, but it's one of the ways we could have grown ourselves in the right way.
So we need to get to Q&A, but I wanted to ask one more question because I think there's at least from the outside, there has to be like an eternal tension between what a hotel wants and needs for room service, for restaurants, and what a restaurant operator wants. And I'm sure you guys don't want to do another menu full of burgers and chicken tenders and seasonal fruit bowls. But how do you work this out? How do you negotiate before you even move into the restaurant? How are you going to make this restaurant a signature of you and not just be another component of the Four Seasons or whoever?
Well, you have every restaurant has its own or should have its own identity, and you have to sell that identity to the people that you're going to be partnering with. And the moment that identity starts to kind of shift tracks, which is very easy to do when you have a lot of people, marketing people, asset managers, dessert aficionados, all in play at the same time. What we do is we keep going back to saying, well, let's talk about who Miss River is. Let's talk about the identity of Miss River, so that we can really just keep reiterating that that's what makes this restaurant special. But again, there's no secret button to press. It's really about relationship, communication, and being confident in what you do, and then also proving that you can be busy and that the revenue can come at the same time.
I think when we did the Hoxton in Chicago, we got a real opportunity because they wanted to design it with us. So we got to design it from the ground up. And the thing that we led with was we want the restaurant to not feel like it's the hotel restaurant. So is there any way that when you walk in, you can't even see the check-in? And so they were into it. We're like, let's walk into a space that feels like it's pure F&B. And then unlike the restaurants they had done before, which was a lot of kind of homogenized concepts, we said, let's do some stuff that's really specific. Let's make the roof a Peruvian restaurant, and then let's make, the downstairs a speakeasy and serve no food. And so they bought into it. And so then when we did other cities, when we did New York with Michael Solomonoff, and we did 3 Israeli restaurants in one space, they had bought into that idea already that yes, we didn't necessarily need a Caesar salad and a burger and your seasonal fruit plate, even though we probably have that on the room service menu somewhere. But a lot of times hotel restaurants are where good ideas go to die. But as we all know, the consumers' minds have even changed. They want stuff that's specific. They don't need another Caesar salad. So we've been able to do very, very specific concepts. So when people go to those spaces, they say, I'm not going to the roof at the Thompson Hotel. I'm going to X restaurant. That to us is the litmus test, is if they're going there and they can name the restaurant by its name. The Hoxton of Williamsburg, with all due respect, before then, I don't think anybody knew what the names of those restaurants were. They just said they were going to have breakfast at the Hoxton, and that's what we wanted to change by doing stuff that was unique and interesting.
There's a phrase that hopefully gets repeated over and over in these agreements, which is mutually agreed upon. So that can apply to the physical design of the restaurant. It can apply to the organizational chart that you set out to put in place, the annual budget looking forward, and what you can allocate to different types of managers. And really, I think underpins what you're asking in a way, which is that hopefully you can get to a point where your mutual agreement and your sign off is kind of required. And at that point, you're able to be that North Star for the restaurant that over time may have a tendency to drift because folks at the corporate level of a hotel group or at the property level of an individual hotel, they come and go. But you're still there saying this is what we set out to do, and these should be our goals here.
Yeah, and one other thing I just wanted to kind of throw out there is really, if you can, especially if you're doing your first one, really try and match up your DNA as a chef with the DNA of that hotel. And if you can, it's a little bit of guesswork, but again, over time and through meetings, hopefully you're able to kind of figure out if it's the right match. But the reason why it can be so important is, hopefully, like a marriage, that becomes your partner for the next few deals. It's a huge amount of time and effort and brain damage for both sides. And I guarantee you, if it's a good match, they're going to want to just keep going with you. And that's the best thing possible. So again, very quickly try and figure that out. If it's not the right thing, move on.
So I'm just interested to know, like, how do you come up with that statistic? Can you come up with that?
It's really difficult. Everyone always asks it. And frankly, the usual answer is you just got to trust that this is happening, which no one really wants to hear. The only example that I can give is a few times where there was an existing restaurant, right? And there was operating history there, and the RevPAR was whatever it is. They changed the restaurant, and then all of a sudden there's a bump. But it doesn't happen very often where you have that raw data to really refer to. But that literally is a question that every single one asks. Yeah.
Because that was the first thing I thought about. I just really want to say thank you. This was very informative. So thanks.
Who else? There's a gentleman way in the corner over there, the jacket on, black jacket. Yes.
How do you typically handle other terms in these management agreements, such as like term, exit, security deposit, because they're not standard leases and you're not funding the entire project yourself? What do you typically do?
We love a 10-year term. If they're going to buy us out between signing and 5 years, we still want to get all 5 years. If they're going to break up with us between 5 and 10, there's multiple years of buyout for us. We go in and say, hey, we're going to help brand your hotel. We went in years ago and did a rooftop bar on a small independent hotel. The most profitable thing about that hotel was the rooftop. We brought like 40% to the bottom line. They sold that hotel based on our numbers and based on that multiple. So that was a true case where we built the value that they ended up selling upon. And thankfully, I had a good lawyer back in those days who had a good buyout structure with us when we got bought out.
And then Kevin, just one more follow-up there. Do you guys, or I guess that's kind of what I was going to say, do you guys typically see a piece of that as well on the flip side if you do above and beyond? And then on the other side, do landlords typically ask you guys to put in a minimum gross sales threshold that they can remove you if you're not hitting certain hurdles? And is that typically a tough negotiation point or no?
No, I think Peter will tell you every year you redraft that budget, and so
more and more they're asking for that provision.
And typically, is that like 60%, 70% of expectations? Or
usually, you set your budget at the very beginning, right? You have to have some type of budget, pro forma. I usually try and get it down to at least 70%. Some of them are looking for 80 or 90%, which doesn't give you much wiggle room at all. The flip side to that is you have to push it back on them. You say, okay, but that has to be based on this occupancy in your hotel. If that occupancy goes down, then guess what? That whole threshold that you're measuring me, that adjusts as well. Pandemic, so it's interesting. They're pushing for more of those types of terms, but the flip side is we're able to push for a lot more terms in the other direction.
I remember we did a deal with the Cubs where we have a restaurant right across from Wrigley Field, and they were trying to push us budget stuff on that. And I was like, well, what if you guys go 57 and 105? I feel like we should be. And so they put some attendance thresholds in the budget. So
Yes, right here.
Also, a big component is like why they approach certain people, like their star power, their reputation, their brand is are you baking in like publicity, launch, and like marketing dollars into this whole thing? And then how early does that start even?
That's a really good. It brings up a really good point that we didn't talk about is what lives in the P&L. And so before you do these deals, figuring out marketing, PR, who they allow you to put on that staff, how much of your G&A gets baked into that. Because what you don't want to do is have to use a bunch of your bandwidth to run that hotel, and you're getting no credit for what percentage of that. My argument to them always is like, listen, I can get a full-time accountant and 3 full-time HR people and 4 people that are directors just to work on this property, or you could pay a percentage of my G&A. You decide which one. I promise you're going to be better off paying a percentage of my G&A. So all that stuff in the MOU beforehand says this is what's going to live on the P&L, including those marketing and PR dollars, which is going to ultimately help them.
Yeah, we call it shared services. And to Kevin's point, they always love to argue about it, and then you literally sit down and you say, oh, okay, if you want dedicated people, it's going to cost you this much. If we do it here as a percentage of G&A, by the way, you just saved 50%.
And then Marie, your new $105,000 accountant.
Exactly.
Or
yeah, it's a very quick conversation.
Do you guys come up with any like creative controllables? One of reference is I put in one of my properties where I had a licensing deal, minimum staffing complement. So basically, so you couldn't just show up one day, your name's on the door, and they've cut down to the point where there's one cook in the kitchen, one server, and they're saying this place is terrible. What kind of creative solutions have you come up with?
That's a great question. It all depends on the revenues that you're bringing in, and so typically you won't have a lot of control over that. If the revenues are low enough that they need to cut labor to meet the labor percentage to make sure that the restaurant is profitable, they will do that. And again, like with what Tyler was saying, like the mutually agreed upon conversation that's in all of these contracts, these clauses, that's a very general term. What if you're not mutually agreeing? You still have to get through the conversation, and you still have to accomplish something. So you write the labor cost into the pro forma, and you say, hey, look, we know that we want this type of service in the restaurant, and we want this many cooks in the restaurant, and so we're going to put 13% for back of house, and we're going to put 11% for front of the house, and we're going to put 10% for management, and then you're really kind of basing it off of those percentages. So if your revenues go down to the point where 13% back of the house means one cook, then that's where you're at. Your goal really as the licensor is to ensure that the top line revenue is coming in. That's where our responsibility lies, is not so much on the bottom line, but more on the top line.
Outside of labor, basically, are there other things, almost like a writer, like a talent would come in and say, these are the things that I need for our brand to be controlled?
I think that can be covered within an audit check, though. So we're doing a licensing deal right now, which allows us, every 3 months to go in and check all this stuff. And if it's not up to a level, we're able to say, you need to change this. And then they have a certain amount of time to cure it, which is a short amount of time.
Yeah, but you can, especially in resorts, right, where you have seasonality, right? Your staffing compendium, which is what you're referring to, a minimum staffing compendium, you definitely can get that into an agreement. And again, if you're in one of those markets that wildly fluctuates, let's say it's something that really busy on weekends, not so busy on like you need to have that minimum staffing. If you can't get that, you probably need to walk away.
Well, I am not sure if we encouraged chefs to move into hotels or discouraged them, but it's been a great conversation.
It should be an encouragement. It should be an encouragement,
there you go.
And then that contract is so freaking important to get it right. And when it's right, it can be really super beautiful. I've had some beautiful relationships and some horrible ones. So hopefully only beautiful moving forward. No dessert auditors.
Get the right negotiator.
Thank you all. Thank you.